Okay, great. Yeah, so I think the big hope is that through these deeper mystical experiences that people can have, that they can really relax some of their need to think of these things as literal or that there's only one right way. And I think we have the history of humanity is filled with people killing each other because of dogma, as you say, because of people from different religions and the whole different
Somebody mute yourself, please.
okay, yeah. So the whole different ways that we have Shiites and Sunnis killing each other since, over 1500 years, and Catholics and Protestants killing each other, and, Orthodox and fundamentalists from the Jewish religion at odds with each other. And, but what we're seeing, this is now the hopeful story, but it may or may not be true. But what we're seeing, I think, is in this globalization era, in the era of the internet, the era that we can talk to each other on Zoom like this, which is, you know, 30 years ago would be considered a miracle, that if we can really have more and more people have these experiences, that we can really um, overcome the kind of fear that people have of people from different religions, because the fear is only because you've got this rigid system that says yours is the only way. So then other religious traditions then challenge that. But if we can help people really experience in a direct way, then they don't really need to rely so much on dogma. And then I think they can become
¿Nos
more
van a hacer ellos? Ahorita.
collaborating with, with each
Sí,
other.
con calma, sí.
Please mute yourself.
Ah, bien, y ahorita ya está mejor, pero
Hello, please
sí.
mute yourself.
Well, so
Thank
anyway,
you.
that's the hope for me, that the more people can have these psychedelic experiences, and I think Ibogaine is a really great example, um, that then we can hopefully, in the because we have global problems right now. It didn't used to have climate change and global warming. We didn't used to have nuclear weapons. We didn't used to have, potentially super powerful AI. So I think a lot of things that are developing now that we really need to deal with are global, and we need global cooperation to really deal with this. And the solution that some of the wealthiest people in the world are saying is, "Oh, let's go to Mars. Let's get out of here." And I think that's really perverse. And the other part is that we bring the same consciousness wherever we go. So it's not like this is an escape. Oh, let's build a new society on Mars. It'll be much better than what we got here. We bring our consciousness with us. And so we really need to focus on the earth, focus on where we're at, try to change consciousness in a global way. And I think this recent executive order that President Trump signed about psychedelics on April 18th was motivated in large part by veterans going to Mexico for Ibogaine. So we really have Ibogaine to thank for this whole transformation that's going on straight from the White House, sending the message to the FDA that they should make psychedelics available to people. I just, Stan Groff is now going to be turning 95 very soon, and there's going to be a new edition of LSD psychotherapy, which he wrote about his therapeutic approach. But I'm writing a bit of the a foreword, and what I was saying is that what we're seeing now with Trump endorsing psychedelics would have seemed in the past like a very fanciful, fantastical LSD trip that nobody would have believed it. But
That's sure.
here it is, and so I think we've got yeah, a lot of hope that Ibogaine will also be moving through the system. We got the 50 million from Texas, another 50 million it looks like from the federal government. Other states are coming up with money. So yeah, there's a real good chance that Ibogaine will also become an FDA approved medicine and then be taken out of Schedule One
How
and
long
made
do you think that
accessible.
will take in your assessment?
Well, right now there's a fundamental problem in that the FDA has put a clinical hold on a research project with Ibogaine. The announcement was they approved an Ibogaine protocol that was part of this White House executive order, but that isn't true. they approved Deborah nor Ibogaine, a metabolite of Ibogaine that's not as psychedelic as Ibogaine. So that was approved. But the problem is that there is this risk of Ibogaine with QT prolongation. And but when you're doing it in a medicalized way, it can be done safely enough. There's always some risk, but it can be done safely enough. However, the FDA has a rule, I think it's about 500 milliseconds or something. If there's something longer than that, a QT prolongation, they refuse to permit the drug to move forward. And many people who take Ibogaine in clinics in Mexico and elsewhere have exceed that limit, but they're fine. They're supervised, they're fine. So my guess is that it will take maybe 5 or 6 years, something like that. It could be quite extensive because first off, you have to overcome the FDA resistance on this QT prolongation, which many of the clinics administer magnesium and give Ibogaine to people under an IV. So if anything happens, they can interrupt. So then I think there has to be this, again, safety study that will really persuade the FDA to open the door to Ibogaine. And then phase 3 studies will take a couple years. But it looks like, also depending on how much it costs, it might cost more than $100 million or $150 million, depending on who does the study. But the big concern that I have is that since there's at least $100 million or more in public money, I hope that Ibogaine is not captured by a for-profit company that then converts public money into private gain and then doesn't make Ibogaine into a generic, but turns it into, oh, I'm going to charge you $5,000 for a dose. So that's a big thing that I worry about. The other thing that I worry about is, the FDA doesn't regulate psychotherapy. They don't know about psychotherapy. They really want to go ahead and many of these for-profit companies try to minimize psychotherapy as much as possible. And what we know about Ibogaine is that it really helps to set your intentions, to have support, but in particular to do the integration work. Because I think people have this wrong idea that Ibogaine, it's a one and done miracle cure. And the part that is sort of one and done miracle is that it resets people's dependence, their brains are reset so that they go through the withdrawal with just a couple of days and their brains are reset. So that happens. But whether that turns into long-term sobriety or controlled use or just long-term maturity is not clear. So I think there's an overemphasis on here's the Ibogaine experience. It's going to do this for you. And I think it's a natural thing when people go from all over the world to clinics in Mexico, then they go back home. Often there's not a lot of the integration work that you really need to solidify the opportunities that have been created during the Ibogaine experience.
I think here's where, it circles back to what we started this conversation talking about, the archetypal journey. And the frame that really makes sense is that the Ibogaine interruption is sort of the beginning of a kind of an archetypal journey for some. It's the beginning. And they've just started. They've gone out the door with the interruption, but then they have a lot of things to heal and evolve and integrate into their life. And that's a journey. And it's, it requires teachers and tools for transformation, perhaps other psychedelics. It's not one and done. And that's so much the myth about Ibogaine and other medicines out there.
I think so. But I think that it doesn't, there are some cases where that is enough. So what we're saying is that that's sort of being oversold. Sometimes it can be one session, it's enough. People get the integration and then they really have transformed their lives. And so that does happen. So it's not completely false, but it's not the common story. And also there's other issues that people can resolve potentially, with MDMA, with psilocybin, with other psychedelics, or even just non-drug psychotherapy. So I think our culture in general is, looking for one dose miracle cures. And that's not really the case. I will say that MAPS is working on what's called an investigator's brochure for Ibogaine. So what that means is that before you can get permission to do research from a regulatory agency, you have to submit them a brochure that summarizes the published scientific research and does risk-benefit analysis. So it's for the investigators' brochure. Usually these come from the manufacturers who make the Ibogaine, but MAPS will be putting it up on our website. So if there's anybody around the world that really is interested in Ibogaine research, they can use the investigators brochure that MAPS will be posting, I'd say, probably in the next month or two, something like that. And then the hope is that there will be work all over the world for different things. I think the big focus has been on either traumatic brain injury or PTSD or opiate dependence. I think Ibogaine's got incredible potential for methamphetamine dependence, for alcoholism, um, all of those things. I see a question in the chat regarding risk of exploitative price points for benefit sharing and intellectual property. Well, I think that the issue is that you can go to the people in Gabon or to community knowledge holders, but and they know how it works, they know how to work with it, but they are not the ones that are going to give permission. It's going to come from regulatory agencies with pharmaceutical sponsors. And they're the ones that are going to be setting the price because what we really want is for the therapy part and the drug part to be covered by insurance. So the wisdom is there in Gabon and other indigenous cultures about how to work with Ibogaine, but they're not the ones that are going to be able to get the regulatory approvals, which then are necessary for insurance coverage.
Can I ask you about that 5,000, you said 5,000 milligrams,
Well, I think it was like 500 milliseconds.
So how do you go about changing that? Because that obviously has to change on a policy level.
Yeah, well, I think this is where you can talk about the clinics in Mexico. They talk about the indigenous use, where they demonstrate that they can do this in a sufficiently safe way. But it will really only come from phase one dose response safety studies. So I think that right now, because of so many people that have gone to these clinics and have gotten successful treatment, the people that were in the White House during the signing ceremony, which is kind of I'd encourage people, if they're really interested, to look at there's like a 46-minute video of President Trump and the White House signing ceremony for the executive order on psychedelics. And there's multiple people there that are talking about their Ibogaine experiences. And so I think really the only way to get over this concern of FDA is going to be with data. And that can either come from these clinics that are not operated under FDA regulations, so that those clinics, those data will not be considered sufficient by FDA, but they may be considered sufficient for the FDA to say, okay, now we will permit a phase one dose response safety study. And that's the way that the data will be generated that will persuade FDA that their limit is too low on the QT prolongation, and that the scale of the need is so great that we can't have the FDA having unreasonable concerns about safety that are not actually reflected in the clinical work that shows that you can exceed that.
Right.
Let's see. Okay, what are some of the learnings that we can take from first pass with MDMA FDA as the fever of Ibogaine takes hold? Well, the problem for me for that with the MDMA FDA was the couple things was that the FDA doesn't understand therapy, but the other problem was that the pharma company that we started and lost control over, and actually hired traditional pharma people to help with commercialization, but then they just approached it in a traditional pharma way. They lost control of the narrative. They didn't respond to critics, and they really just wanted to sell drugs and not the therapy. So they didn't explain the therapy. They didn't do anything that I think would have been necessary. So the big mistake was twofold. One was ignoring the fact that culture is more important than the science. So, Lakshmi, like the work that you're doing, trying to educate people, the culture blocks or permits science. So for 20 plus years, from the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 and on up until the FDA. Rick Strassman began DMT research in 1990, but that was to see if it caused schizophrenia. We started looking at beneficial use of MDMA in 1992. Um, the suppression of research was based on politics. It was and culture. It was not based on the science. So when you are a pharmaceutical company and you're doing something non-traditional, you cannot rely on traditional approaches because they fail. And then particularly when you say we don't need to educate the culture. So the first lesson I would say is that there has to be lots and lots of public education. That's what actually happened for President Trump to issue this um, executive order for Texas with Brian Hubbard and Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, to get 50 million from the legislature. It was based on stories, in part then transformed into data by Nolan Williams and others at Stanford. So it was the combination of the stories with this sort of initial scientific backing that helped change the minds of some key opinion leaders that led to the White House executive order and to all this money going into Ibogaine research. The other part, so that's the public education part. The other part of it is the therapy part, and I think we should not shy away. Like we have this company, this MindMed, that's changed their name to Definium, that's working on LSD for generalized anxiety disorder. And what they're proud to say is that they don't do any therapy. They don't need therapists. You can just give LSD without any therapy. But they have therapists in the room providing support, but they claim that's not therapy. So I would say rather than run away from the therapy component in order to supposedly satisfy the FDA, the FDA is not completely of the view that these drugs work all by themselves. The research is all coming from therapists there. I know that with Ibogaine, it's very difficult to speak a lot of the time, but when I did Iboga a long time ago, from that experience, I had a therapist there. And in part, it was helpful. At other parts, I would look at this therapist and I would like, why do I have to struggle so hard? Can't you just help me through this? You got to do it yourself. So, the therapist can help, but you've got to do the work yourself. But it doesn't mean that the therapists are irrelevant. And so I think that would be a big aspect of Ibogaine to particularly talk about the preparation and the integration part of it and to not run away from that.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, that's what our mission is today, is to share that piece about the integration. So anybody else have any questions? So can you tell us what are your plans, or what is MAPS getting involved with Ibogaine, and if so, how?
Well, all right. So I do have to go in 5 minutes, but I can explain. So once there was the 50 million from Texas for Ibogaine, MAPS over 10 years ago, more than we began the first scientific studies with Ibogaine, where we were looking at clinics in Mexico and in New Zealand and did baseline measures using the addiction severity index and then check people 1 month every month for a year. And that helped. But then once I saw that the Texas money was going to be matched by pharmaceutical sponsors, I said, I don't want to really be involved. I want to be involved where it's being done for public benefit, not for private gain. So now there is potentially a chance with this 50 million from the federal government to match 50 million from Texas with other states. Maybe there could be by the way, I did Iboga, not Ibogaine. And I did Iboga with LSD at the same time. So I can't really say I fully understand what Iboga does because it was mixed with LSD. But I think there needs to be some kind of pharmaceutical sponsor that works on with all this research that's being done at universities and potentially does this for public benefit. But unless that's the case, MAPS is not directly involved.
Okay.
Yeah, I've just seen too much where the pharmaceutical for-profit people take over and it just isn't what we hoped. And so we're busy with other things. But There is some of the people that worked at MAPS that have started a new company to try to work on Ibogaine for opiate dependence. And maybe that could be a company that evolves to work with the different federal and state money. So I'm sort of exploring that a little bit, but so far I've just been too disillusioned by for-profit drug development.
Yeah, exactly. I think many people here can agree with you on that. So but I think there's a lot of room, like you said, for education and for letting people know that how the plant medicines work and how to work with them and how to have a journey. So is there
Well, here's what Anders wrote, and I think it's really interesting. Fat chance of pharma coming in from a conscious and moral point of view. That's for sure true. I completely agree with it. But we have public money now, not investor money. And so that's the big issue is will this public money be captured by private interests? And there was an attempt by Gilgamesh, which makes a patented version of like the ibogaine molecule that they claim has, better effect on the heart, but they've never tested it in humans. And Texas didn't want to work with them. So that part was good. I was really glad to see that. But what's the new opportunity? That's not clear. And if it's public money, that's the only chance. So public benefit pharma building on public money might potentially, but yeah. So I'll be speaking with these.
pharma needs a change of heart for that to happen. Literally, pharma would need the people who control those decisions would need to have a change of heart
Yes.
from profit to true benefit, from
Yeah. Well, the thing about public benefit is you can still make a profit. It's just not your number one thing. You just don't sacrifice everything. You don't have to maximize profit. Public benefit corporations are a modification of capitalism where you don't have to maximize profit. But so anyway, that's this opportunity. Now that there is this potential 50 million from the federal government to match the money, but all the universities in Texas, from what I understand, are looking for royalties. They're looking for money for their research, and so it's sort of, at least as far as what I can see, it's tending to move in a more for-profit way.
Yeah, I think greed is a big factor with Ibogaine because so many people are in need. It's such a huge market.
Yeah.
Um,
I should say one thing very quickly is that I started MAPS in 1986, but as nonprofit drug development, and Howard Lotsoff started NDA International to develop Ibogaine also in 1986, and he did it in a for-profit way. And what developed after a very short amount of time was various people suing each other over intellectual property, and that doomed the whole Ibogaine development for decades. But now those patents are expired and in the public domain. So that is the opportunity of Ibogaine for opiate addiction. It's not controlled by anybody's patents.
Anybody can research it, you're saying,
Well,
but
anybody can research no matter about patents, but anybody can market now
oh,
because the patents on Ibogaine for substance abuse are in the public domain. So various people look to patent the manufacturing process or other ways to try to block other people and make money off of it. But the core patents on Ibogaine for substance abuse, so Ibogaine for traumatic brain injury, that's something new, and maybe there is a patent on that, I don't know. But Ibogaine for substance abuse of different kinds is in the public domain.
I see. Well,
Um,
that's for us.
yeah, Jeremy has a question, but maybe that'll be the very last because then I got to go.
Jeremy, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Hi. Question about funding for more research and development. Is there any effort to put funds from the Sackler settlement towards
So
research
great
and
question.
development?
That's how the whole effort to get public money began with Brian Hubbard in Kentucky. There was 840 million going to Kentucky from Sackler and other pharma companies, and he tried to get 42 million, 5% of that, for Ibogaine research. And he had hearings, things looked really good, and then it was blocked by the new governor and attorney general. And then he eventually went to Texas and got the Texas money, not from Sackler money, but from public money from Texas, and now the federal money. But yeah, the whole idea to use Sackler money to help address a problem that they created makes total sense. I actually was in touch with Richard Sackler recently, not recently, years ago, and I asked him if he would fund Ibogaine research. And he said, oh, he had to think about it. They just had a corporate responsibility group that they started. And then after a couple of months, they said, no, they're not going to fund it. And then a couple of months after that, Purdue Pharma patented another drug to help you get off of opiates. It was just pathetic. So, but yeah, no, it was a good thought about trying to get the Sackler money for that, and maybe that's possible in other states, but at least so far that's not happened. But
Okay.
Lakshmi, I really appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for having me today. And I think things are turning around about access to Ibogaine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick, for joining
Okay,
us.
great.
Appreciate everything you do as well.
Yeah, a pleasure. Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that was great. Anders, do you want to pick up the thread where you were, and then whenever you feel ready to call Paul in, maybe segue with Paul for a bit, and then
Yeah, absolutely. I think look, Paul has been really, he's one of the real founding elders, and he really sort of path a long time ago about what relational holding is, and completely and utterly informed my thinking about how people could possibly turn up for their own healing. And I know, there's a few others in today in the ibosphere listening today who have also benefited from, Paul's presence. And I think this is a really important word to say, is that when people are trying to heal, when they're trying to overcome their trauma, they need the right hearth. And I've always looked at addiction as perhaps, burning the right fire, the fire of change, the fire of eros. You're wanting to change the way you feel, but actually the problem is within our culture and within our society, we no longer have those communal hearths where people feel held and seen and heard and acknowledged. And I think this is what, Lakshmi's kind of grand vision is, and Awake's grand vision is to provide the right hearth for people to heal. I would love Paul to come in and just kind of talk about, how after years and years of working with Ibogaine, was this an intuitive way of working for him, or was it something that gradually evolved? Because now we see people like Gareth Moxie from Inner Realms, and Tom Leonard from Anselmo, and Barry Rosanoff from Iboga Quest. And forgive me if I've not brought your names here, but these are all the underground providers who not only really have great medical oversight, but they develop a relationship with their clients before they come in. They know who they're talking to. The people feel relaxed when they come in. They've done pre-treatment. They have an opportunity to attach to maybe an Ibogaine soft landing, or that's my word for it, and then integration. I think maybe Paul was the first person to actually really consider all of these aspects and bring them into his Ibogaine provision, or at least suggest where they are. I'm incredibly grateful to Paul. Incredibly grateful. The man actually saved my life. There is no two ways about it. If I hadn't have found Ibogaine, I would have been dead in 6 months. So I would love Paul to come in and wax lyrical in his own indomitable style. Yeah, and maybe you could give a leading question to Paul. That might be the way forward.
One sec. I just have to bring him on. I saw him. Where did he go? Paul, are you there? There he is. Do you have audio? Yeah. Hi, Paul.
Hi guys, do you have audio?
Your audio is kind of low. I don't know why. Maybe your volume is down on your computer.
No, I don't think so. Is it any better? Can you hear?
It's very soft.
I do apologize. A few gremlins here. I mean, how to follow that, guys? I don't really know where to pick up the thread.
I don't know what to do here either because I think it's on your end. Do you have a headset on? Sometimes taking the headset off helps, or putting it on helps.
I don't. Is it any better if I get closer to the mic?
Are you on your computer? Oh, your microphone may be low volume on your computer. You might just...
I do apologize, guys. Gremlins. How to do with this? Is it
Can
mounted?
you try coming on your phone? Perhaps that would work better.
No, I can swap over. Just give me a second, guys. My apologies.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a brand new camera, so go figure.
Oh, it's okay. Well,
In the meantime, Shane Wynn, do you fancy talking about your experience of pre-treatment and Ibogaine provision and come in from a angle whether you felt that was useful for you?
Shane over here.
Yeah.
Okay, here you are. Is that a yes? Should I? Okay, there. Maybe not. Asha is here too. We could call Asha. I don't know if she's still here. Oh, there. Asha, would you like to share something?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, sorry about that. I think everybody's having microphone issues right now. Yeah, so absolutely. My experience with Ibogaine is, fairly new and relative in, comparison to some of you guys in this world in the ibogosphere. I'm probably about 45 days post-treatment. And I got into a really good, pre-treatment integration coaching, working with Anders. And I got seen with Gareth Moxie down in Inner Realms. It was truly a beautiful experience the whole way through. Through preparing for the process, really understanding what I was getting myself into with the medicine, and really getting ready to meet the medicine. Forming a connection with myself, the medicine, before I even got ready for treatment. And then as I met the medicine, I felt completely prepared for it. I think if I didn't have that good integration and preparation, it would have completely been a totally different experience, and I would have been completely thrown off of my, as Gareth likes to say, my globe would have been completely shaken. But after the medicine, that's when the real medicine, and that's when the real work had happened. Everything in preparation was really to get me ready for what I was about to walk back into my life with. And I can't speak for my wife and my kids. They mean a lot to me, and that was one of the things that really motivated me into doing this. But it's given me the opportunity to be a more authentic, genuine, true version of myself. I know Anders says it all the time, is it doesn't make me the next, oh, my brain's farting on me right now. It's not going to make me the next, George Clooney or Brad Pitt, but it made me the true authentic version of myself that has been there all along, that really I should have been and, wasn't able to be because of the traumas, the CPTSD, the TBIs that I've experienced. So it really did help me really become the version of myself. Sorry, I kind of just really jumped right in there and didn't give a good background of myself. But yeah, to kind of just backtrack a little bit and, give a little bit of background on myself is, I just retired out of the military. I was in the United States Army for 20 years. I had multiple combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I thought maybe that was what was causing me to have a lot of the issues. But, you know, after working with Anders, is one of those things like I can relate a lot to Anders' story is, you know, joining the military was just a way of me escaping and trying to build that layer and build these different versions of myself, trying to figure out who I was, trying to kind of determine who I was going to be. And through building that kind of facade and putting those masks on, I never really figured out who I truly was, because of all the trauma I endured as, you know, as a child, the shame, the guilt, the fear. And the medicine showed me that, and it really helped me understand that and show up for myself. And Ibogaine really taught me how to kind of be there for myself and be that parent for myself. And, you know, after the experience that I had, that's what really truly helped me be comfortable in my own body and really start to figure out who I am in this world and where I fit in this experience. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity and the work that you guys have been doing. And I know that you guys invest this is your entire life, and it's really opened a lot of doors for me.
Thank you so much, Shane, for sharing. I think Paul is ready, so let me remove your spotlight and bring Paul on.
Hello, do we have audio now?
Not much better.
Not much better. Okay, I do apologize. It's a brand new bloody camera.
There might be a volume button on your phone that you can raise.
Yeah, I can jump straight on here. Maybe we can talk straight from the phone.
Also under meeting settings, Paul, you can set your volume on the meeting settings.
I do apologize.
Oh,
do you have contact?
That's much better, Paul.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Oh, crikey. Yeah, I've been listening, guys. It's like where to follow with all that wonderful communication, the articulation on that. I was kind of frenetically scribbling down notes and things that I wanted to say. For sometimes these things you kind of script them out, but you know, not to be performative about this, but just to parallel exactly what Anders was saying. In the essence of this is that what it comes down to is that the first point of contact with this work would be the point of courage. I mean, it's the first of all human qualities. It guarantees the rest. And I think from the point of view of getting involved with this, with my origin story, it was a case of as a young man. My first experience with psychedelics were, like many young people, were associated with festivals. With the West Country in England, it's kind of a rite of passage. And I thought they were beneficial. It was very pro-social. It was enjoyable. I started to put those years behind me. And as I moved into my mid to early 20s, and this is at a time when some of my friends are going off, joining the military and going off and into active service, and I was kind of hanging back for a couple of years on that. And what happened for me in the summer of '95, I'd recall at the time my partner had come back from Glastonbury, and I used to be a bit of a beer drinker. I used to enjoy a beer, and I came back and I'd lost the endowments of enjoying a few pints of Guinness a night. And what happened is I started to develop symptoms of a gastric disorder that rapidly progressed with such ferocity. But at the time, this coincided with what I can only define as a spiritual awakening. So it seemed to coincide with the manifestation of a developing pathology, And very quickly, my life completely fell apart. My capacity to work, autonomy, everything, it became life-threatening. And lo and behold, I found myself in the hospital in a pretty terrible place. My relationship had ended. My friends started drifting away. My family didn't know what to do. It's just like, what is this? For that, I was a picture of health, an athlete, springboard diver. I'd done martial arts since I was 11. I'd attained my first Dan black belt in Wadaru karate. I rolled doing jiu-jitsu, all of this, and it was all taken away. So everything that I defined myself by was gone. And I was this scared, shitless 24-year-old, potentially facing the end of my life. And one time I was admitted to hospital, and the doctors, they gave me analgesia. I was given diamorphine. And in the second that happened, yes, the pain was gone, but something else happened. It connected to something, and the maelstrom of the tornado of all these thoughts and feelings and everything else that I was able to brush off, that I couldn't now, because I defined myself in terms of being robust and having a constitution. All that was taken away. It's like I was advanced towards the end of my life. I'd lived a life, and I was towards like an end of life experience. And I embraced it. I completely embraced it. I took it as something, this is a solution to my problems. And from there, I started to dance around. It became secondary, the whole thing of, okay, I've got this condition. My life as it was is over. This is my life now. And I progressed through there, and it became about doctors, hospitals, surgeons, psychologists, psychiatrists, and it was completely overwhelming. There was no logical reason to not want to embrace something that brought you peace, comfort, safety, a sense of belonging, when everything else that a human being needs is kind of gone. And you're surrounded by ambivalence, fear, and uncertainty. People are watching you completely deteriorate. So, but anyway, I advanced that a little bit further forward. At the time, I'd come into another relationship, and we cut forward to maybe the early 2000s. And I was in a situation like many people on pain meds. I'd gone through a lot of doctor shopping. I'd gone from one doctor to another. I was finding myself doing things I couldn't believe sometimes, trying to obtain source. And this sounds like very familiar. I'm sure we've all heard of this with people that we've worked with for opiates. But it just became insane. It was just, I didn't recognize myself. And, you know, the fear and the self-rejection and the loathing of self just built. And it became a vicious cycle. It's very difficult to escape. And in the meantime, I was in a relationship. I had 2 children, and we're moving into the early 2000s. And at one point, I got to the point where I realized that I was in danger with what I was doing. I'd made that point where I'd maxed out with my doctor, and I'd lost access to the source of the pain meds that I had. And I transited from there and started sourcing illicitly. So very quickly, I advanced from that stage over to a maintenance program. And when I was referred over, they didn't know what to do with me. They'd not had anybody as a chronic pain patient at the time. So I was underdosed, and I sat for 3 weeks, completely miserable, or very underdosed, just rattling all the time, trying to just think this is going somewhere. It's not. And being with a substance misuse service, you know, the sort of Damocles hanging over you all the time, and playing the games, giving tests, and trying to fool the test, and you know, it just doesn't go anywhere. One evening, I sat down and I watched the BBC 2 One Life series, and this documentary came on, and there's this crazy Scotsman facing a camera, and he's holding a capsule. Said, "I'm going to take this capsule, and it's either going to end my addiction or end my life." And I watched this. I just happened to switch over onto BBC 2. I think this was 2003. And I'd already seen some of the amalgamations. So this is David Graham Scott's Detox or Die. And he'd done a couple of other documentaries, small ones, and put them into an amalgamation. And of course, naturally, I went to my key worker a week later And I said, look, what can you tell me about this? And I told them what I knew, what I thought I knew. And what they said to me is, so you're going to take a drug to offset a drug, and that's going to deal with that. And the guy kind of laughed and kind of dismissed it, and then realized what he'd said, because I was on a methadone program. Anyway, so that was 2003. And then naturally, like many people, I was searching for a solution to advance out of that situation, because the condition that I had, gastric condition with Crohn's, the worst thing that you can have is opioids on board. As a lot of us know, with opioids, you get dysbiosis, you get small bowel overgrowth, and it's like tipping gasoline on the fire to put out the fire. It's incredibly damaging. It just burns through the gut. The pathology just advances very quickly as such. So I started looking around, and I think I came across Bendelonen's rite of passage. And then later, as things kind of progressed a little bit further, I think it was Bruce Parry's tribe. And what I saw with these individuals where Bruce had gone in Gabon is that he was taking into the village, and this has really had my attention, is that he'd gone there, and the first thing they did when he arrived, they built him, I think it's called a tuddy, I don't know whether Ewan's there, he may be able to advise me, I'm not sure. They built him a home, they built him a house as he arrived in this village in the interior somewhere. And as it progressed, he had to stay there for 2 weeks to align himself with the ebb and flow of the village. And it seemed profound and significant to me. I started to recognize it's something part of the architecture of what it is to be human that completely translated over to the situation of that this is something that's important. Anyway, we cut forward another couple of years to, I think it was 2008. And the morning routine of, as many people know, with maintenance, methadone, getting up every morning and glugging down a giant glass of green viscous goo and watching your pupils shrink to a pinhole, and just sitting there in the morning depressed watching reruns of Fraser or whatever morning TV is, that's still probably running now, and just thinking this can't go on. And what I found happened one September morning in 2008, I woke up one morning, I just couldn't get down the methadone. And by the end of the day, I think I'd managed to get 20 down. And within about, I think it was about a week, I dropped from like 90 milligrams down to about 20. And I stabilized, no withdrawals or anything else. A lot of restless legs, legs bouncing and stuff like that. And I stayed there until the spring of 2009, when I had made contact with a practitioner in Holland. And I made my preparations. I got myself as healthy as I could. I got myself adjusted. I got myself in the morning. I got a good routine. I started getting as much exercise as I could at the time. And, you know, at the time, a lot of it felt like autopilot. It felt like there was a force at work coming. A lot of it came from the essence of the medicine, just seeing how these people were surrounded, guided, enveloped, the sense of belonging. It's like this innate quality to it. And I thought this just is the way to go. And I trusted this feeling very much. I found myself going through this experience and coming back after the third day, believing it hadn't worked, to the point where I touched down an hour from Amsterdam. And as soon as I got back on home ground, it's something just a switch just flipped. And then began the awakening. So from that point on there, I had communications going on in regards to what's the next process, aftercare, and of course, because it's methadone, some element of post-acute withdrawals, but it was manageable. Sleep was a problem. I think at one case, I would have days and days without sleep, or was having to take baths like several times a night. I was medicating with cannabis. This is time before prescriptions were available, but whatever worked. But I was done with it. I was done. I was not actively seeking it. Excuse me. It was very difficult, though. It was very difficult, coinciding with a couple of comorbidities that were still kind of present, and other elements of interpersonal dynamics and life factors as such. And as the year progressed, I bloomed. I gained like 15 kilograms I completed the maturation cycle. There's a lot of time when opiates come on board, shuts down your endocrine system, your body kind of goes into a stasis mode. I got this late end bloom that you get in your 20s, and I flourished, and things were just so transformative. And at that point, there, my communications with individuals around the world, I expressed an interest to get involved. It felt important to get involved, most in the sense of from a point of belonging, the significance of what is possible as a human being, and I considered that it was a curse that became the blessing, but it connected me to myself, to other people, and that was, I mean, isn't that the etiology of addiction? Is the loss of connection with self and others? But anyway, I mean, if there's anything you want to ask me at this point, Lakshmi, if there's anything you want to interject on that, please do.
Can you talk a little bit about this transition from like self-loathing to self-love?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, part of my origin story is that I was born on the Chattel Naval Dockyard, so I grew up around hard-assed military men, beer drinking, cigarettes, brawling, scrapping men. It was a very, as a sensitive, very observant child, it wasn't necessarily a conducive environment for me. And I recognized very early on that the nature of my home environment and my family and the world is, I think all children do, they know things. Often you'll see children trying to manage their environments as such. Sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah. Well,
that's ADHD for it. Say again.
There's a couple of things. There's a couple of things you said about self-loathing and
yes.
transition from self-loathing to self-love, and about, I think when we talked, you were talking about how people in the military they're going into the military for community, but then come out of it damaged. And what does Ibogaine and this journey help them get over that psychological hurdle of whatever it is, addiction even.
A lot of the military personnel that a lot has interacted with, and some of the ones that are in active communication with now that are becoming prominent on networks within UK and Europe, the Allied forces. I think a lot of us are aware of this. That a lot of them made the self-realization that their inclination to push themselves towards the promise of tribe, the archetype of the stern paternal drill instructor of initiation. It's like because it's not there in society, in the Western culture, the way that I think the needs are not met. If you think in terms of in Gabon, where they have a culture and these people are dependent upon one another, they can rely on one another. People in the West were fractured by ever-increasing capacity to need to make ends meet, get children to school, deal with the whatevers of life and everything else. But a lot of these guys, the people in the military, one of the things after they've come back and they've demobilized, and they realize very quickly that when they come back is what they drop back into the landscape of Civvy Street, and nothing makes sense. Helicopters are coming over, and there's a sense of just dread and terror. The cars are backfiring. The 5th of November or the 4th of July, and these people they realize that their bodies are weaponized, and very quickly they start to understand that it not only affects them, their home life, the ways that they have no choice to choose to self-medicate with alcohol or whatever. It affects it. There's a lot of collateral damage to their children. And we know this. We know about the generational models of this. And my grandfather served in North Africa during the Second World War. And back then they called it shell shock. And it was very, very succinct, very clear. But I grew up early in life witnessing the contortions of how he dealt with it, such. And it seemed to, during my experience, with Ibogaine, it seemed to bear relevance. I didn't necessarily understand it at the time, but working with some of these individuals, like we did start working with individuals for opiate addiction, guys that had got shrapnel wounds, concussive injuries or whatever, or TPI injuries and stuff, or they're on chronic pain meds, and it's the usual thing, or SSRIs, benzodiazepines, sleepers, uppers, down, all the things, just the usual suspects. Is that the nature of that medication? It just the more the doctors seemed to try to help, the worse things got. And so they'd hang on in there. And I know the infrastructure in the UK is, I don't think it's as comprehensive as the US, but there's I find that in the US, I think that they're more kind of open to be innovating as such. And of course, some people would have access to, like, medical cannabis has been more freely available in the US for a lot longer than the UK. But even now, I find, like with the veterans, my communications is that a lot of the time when I will talk to them or send them material, they'll look at it and they'll kind of blink and they'll say, this is really good. Or like in recent events with the executive signing order and Marcus Capone and all these other people, which, I mean, it's very compelling. It really is the human story. And because veterans are really kind of the point of leverage to make this socially and medically palatable, and understanding that we're dealing with the mammalian brain, and you understand how we're culturally conditioned on a subconscious level to, we all know about the whole thing, the war on drugs. This is your brain on drugs, this is good, this is bad, all of that. But the awareness of that and the impediments to that. But people started coming through and saying, look, I'm at the end of the road, I need to do this. And what I found is from 2009 onwards into 2010, I was working with people and groups and working all around the world, in Greece, in other countries, in Europe, down in the Southern Hemisphere, everywhere. And everywhere I went, it would be a different topological landscape, different culture and language, but it would be the same outcome. It would be the same outcome. People, the failure of the system to address the issues of what it is to be human, what happens when we suffer, what happens to our physiology, what is trauma, what is aversion, and disarming those systems and people, they lose executive function, their bodies are jacked by stress hormones, which further deteriorate, and if they have comorbidities, it's just a system of decline, down and down and down and down and down and down, always. And it gets to the point where there's only so much the body can take. And these people are the most courageous. Everything that I learned came directly from these people. The direct interfacing, it was such a steep learning curve. It's an incredible, humbling experience. I mean, it's profoundly humbling to work and be of service to people doing this work as such. But to progress from there, I suppose, bearing in mind that supposedly I was living with what has been termed an incurable condition, with inflammatory bowel disease, with Crohn's disease, is considered to be potentially very life-threatening. And what I found is very quickly that the journey really needs to continue. You have to stay in a state of equilibrium, because you're constantly having to, of course, maintain good sleep cycles, maintain nutrition, optimum health, discharging, exercise, adjusting for travel and everything else. And it was difficult at times, very difficult. I've spent several years, what I like to poetically put as being cloud hidden and whereabouts unknown. I retreated up into the mountains of Scandinavia in recent years to address one aspect of my health. And I would consider it unfortunate, but then I would turn it around and think, well, what would I say to people? What would I say to people? How would I get them to flip the script? And I recognized it was an immense gift. It was an immense gift. 6 years ago, I was at the point where my life was coming to an end, and was having like multiple surgeries, and they're pulling bits out like an old car, and it's just the law of diminishing returns. But I got the understanding that it begins within oneself, within the essence of one's physiology, the emotions. I think there's a beautiful quote by Viktor Frankl about on stimulus and response, and things just started to make sense. I started to feel in regards to that, and I think what is the nature? I think Gabor Mate has spoken quite extensively about the nature of in his book, like When the Body Says No.
Well, you said something else about, if I may interject, you
Yeah.
said something else about going from isolation to functional solitude. I really liked that expression.
Yeah. That was last night, wasn't we spoke briefly. Yes, I mean, the first point of contact is that when, of course, as always, meeting people where they're at, taking that template and understanding that, and understanding where the advancements were made from the point of view of my first point of contact going into that, what would do, taking point, go down, meet people where they're at. And the first thing is people would be in a frenetic state, distressed, or just at the end of the road.
Can you give an example rather than generalizing, somebody with?
How so?
Well, maybe you could just share a story about somebody you worked with, what they came in with, and how it worked, and how that happened. If that'll work for you.
Yeah, of course.
Paul, you could talk about me. Because I was a complete bloody nightmare to begin with.
Not really, mate. Not really. But it's always recognizing that in every instance you're getting the human being. Always recognizing that you're getting the human being, and then keeping that on that level ground, not that division. Over here, there, the signal, and all that kind of stuff. But the first thing is people would come open-hearted, earnest, kind of in reservation about. You see the vulnerability, and it's interesting that most of us consider vulnerability a synonym of that as being weakness. It's a strange thing, but that the pathway through which we heal is that we are able to be open and allow for the capacity for healing to happen. Now, with Anders, it was very simple. From the first point of contact, I recognized you can see it straight away. It's present, but you realize you have to manage. You have to manage the expectations. You get people into a state of, the notion is that you want to, like, I believe today now you can get all your medicals and you can just drop in, fly off to wherever, and you're good to go. You're good to go within a few days sometimes, and it's shocking. But if you're going to do this, and again, bringing it back to Bruce Parry's tribe, Gabon, when he arrived there, I was watching this one night back in 2005, and I was just mesmerized by what was happening. It's just like he's arrived in the village, and the whole village and the whole tribe are surrounded with us. We have to emulate that. We have to transcribe that and enmesh that into a level so that is available. So that energy, that interface is available. And in essence, I brought that. It wasn't like an academic thing. It was very much an intuitive thing of curiosity, and just interacted with that, understood. So we're dealing with a stimulant. So we're dealing with cardio excitability. So we want that refractory period of time. We want a period of time where there's a distance. We want some good clean morphology on the EKG. Let's do that. And if something comes back and we get a rhythm and trace, you can see it. Okay, well, there's the signature and the way we deal with it. And that people are going to be like in fear that they won't get to proceed as such. But it's part of the stepping stone, part of the preparation. It's just that if you want to do this, if you want to work with this medicine and do this, and you want to do it to the best capacity that you can, and you want to ensure that people they have the safety and the comfort, and the efficacy of the treatment is paramount. So you get people as prepared as much as they can. Sometimes people just don't want to commit. So you work day to day, as much communication. If you can get people to do a tactical retreat, get them out of the You know, if they're in the smoke down in London, I mean, you're never 5 minutes away from a drug dealer in London in some areas. So you need to be in a different neck of the woods, literally. And if you, like Anders, they had the opportunity to go to Sweden. It was a slam dunk idea, but it works. But there, this is part of the challenge and the difficulty. Not everybody has that, and a lot of the times when working with people, I would, in the early days, I'd interface a lot with social services. I was surprised by how just supportive people were. They didn't necessarily know, but resources sometimes were made available to assist people. And a lot of the time, people are dealing with financial difficulties or criminal matters pending. I can, around the time when I worked at Anders, I was working with a young British first generation Asian lad, and he was facing a custodial sentence. And I spoke on behalf. And the judge at the time had never had anybody present for court with a history of drug use related as such. And the judge was very pleased. But, you know, these kind of interactions, just for them to present where the individuals have never seen this before in my court, where somebody has presented themselves and they're given just a minimal kind of, they have to do community service or whatever. I don't know if it was a driving offense or something, but this was the nature of my life and the interactions from 2009 onwards. It became this kind of an autopilot thing, but was constantly on the move.
How many people did you work with during that period?
Well, from 2009 to in the early days, it was just, as I'm sure many of us did, it was high volume. We were so enthused, we started pumping it out. I was, at the time, here's something else I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. This is something that relationships come to an end, and my marriage came to an end. And not long after, I was in another relationship, working with my partner at the time. But we started pumping up the numbers. We were available, and every day we're having people requesting. The actual numbers I can't say. So every day, sometimes I sit there and I think about people, how many people that we've seen for different reasons as such, a lot that I've kept in touch with. But, you know, at that time, I think back in 2010, I think there were only a handful of people in Europe and a few over in Mexico at the time. So,
yeah,
not many people going in availability as such. But yeah, I mean, back to that with Anders' situation, it was at every juncture. It was very easy. It's very easy. You could see people when they're kind of toiling, the internal turmoil as such, but they look to you, and I think my observation of that is sometimes it's like a formative step that got skipped, or like a relationship when children have to go away from school and they're in an unforgiving environment, and there's a lack of attuned care of the social context as such, and people sometimes have to acquiesce something of themselves just to maintain a sense of compliance, to fit in connection. You must maintain connection for safety as such. Again, these things seem to play very heavily into that. A lot of it as well, you know, the so-called psychopathology, depression, blah, blah. I mean, wouldn't be too keen on the whole thing of really kind of embracing that. I think it was a useful metric of comparison, but you know, dying nonsense, I think, is probably an appropriate term, because it's just a consequence arising. Who's going to feel pretty chipper when their life's in dire straits as such? So what are we saying? Okay, the normal people over there, and you know, the people that are on the scrap heap are over there. I'm really sorry, but here's your dying nonsense label. Take a seat and go wait. And people, you know, it's a form of banishment, which is the worst fate that can befall you as a human being.
Can I ask you a question about the weaponization? You said that, you know, people who have been weaponized. And the way that I think about this is that it's not just people going into the military. It's many, many men who end up not being able to feel their emotions, and in one way or the other weaponized to not feel or
Yes.
not show that they feel because it's considered weakness. And one of the landmarks of doing any kind of entheogenic journey, including particularly the Ibogaine, it's surrender. You have to surrender to the experience, and that surrender is essentially a feminine kind of quality, where you're. So is that what happens when somebody goes through it, or that's the
well, set and setting. What I found at the time my partner and I recognized that the significance of just that, the balance, the equilibrium between the fact that you have a male and a female component, it's kind of archetypical structure. It's like you've recreated the essence of what home is. Safety. What is home? Home is a place. It's a sense of connection and belonging. It was a potent medicine. It was a potent means to generate a set and setting that really fueled the creation engine. A lot of the time it just be non-vocal. People would be under the medicine. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are working couples that know this. They know that there's a lot of leverage from that. You're generating. It's almost effortless. It's literally. I apologize. My apologies. So yeah, but this is it. We'd create these environments that were conducive to healing. Some beautiful places in the Greek archipelagos, and some transformative experiences came about, and people would return back, and at all points we would do as much as we could, returning people back to the environments, and really not being really disinclined to not want to refuse people treatment, just not to return them back whence they came, going back to a place that contributed to making you sick, whilst maintaining ownership and not delegating over responsibility or blame to anything else. It's difficult to go back to a place, an environment, and patterns of behavior that make you sick. It's hard. How can you?
Yeah, you got to have a plan for what you're going to do.
Yes, of course, as such. But I was actually taking notes earlier, which is really unusual for me. So I have I think there's a quote Robert Sapolsky had quoted from a classic statement by the physiologist George Bartholomew. He said that an organism is inseparable from its environment. You cannot properly understand its distribution, its behavior, or its physiology if you study it and remove it from the context it evolved in and lives in. Trying to understand an organism in isolation, stripped of its ecological, sociological, physical surroundings, misses the point. The environment isn't just around the organism, it's part of the organism. So, I mean, these kind of things would distinguish themselves. I think the cell biologists as well. I think Bruce Lipton pretty much said the same thing as well. He did cell cultures and got the exact same cells and put them in different growth mediums as such. And if you scale that up, if you take a cellular culture and you scale that up, then you get an organism. So it's kind of a rough comparison, but I'm sure the point comes across quite distinctly as such. But of course, when you understand the nature of the mammalian brain, that we have networks for rest and digest, for prosocial, for connection, for aversion, for fear, for the capacity to defend or take flight as such, and then understanding that and what activates those, and the nature of our environment. If you understand just how many intrusive elements there are in the environment that could be that signal threat or danger, what is our resting baseline? What is our baseline? You think the world is chaos at the minute. It's an ever increasing cycle of chaos and intrusion and mores of expected people. It's a lot for people to take on, and the perturbing factors of that are significant, especially if you are in a state of active addiction. Yeah, Victor, I think it was Viktor Frankl. He states between the stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Beautiful quotes, beautiful things. There's many things. I mean, I could give you lots of lovely flowery quotes as such. I mean, they are nice. But really, when it comes when it comes down to it, I think maybe the unscripted thing is probably just as equally conducive to maybe getting the message across. Well, essentially, at this point, I returned after many years working very minimalistic or peripherally, coming back to looking to emulate that same set and setting and create, our species from the dawn of time have gathered around fires, and we've created space, and it's a place where human beings would meet as such. And essentially, we're looking to do that again. There's a few of us together that are coalescing, and we're looking to do a collaboration and just work with people. I have a couple of areas of interest that I'm particularly interested in. I know that some individuals that don't necessarily fit the criteria for the conventional treatment, or even particularly the upper end of the low dosing protocol stabilization. But there are new tools coming. There are new protocols. There's a lot you can do. There's understanding. I think is it Sadie Kaufman? I spoke to her last year. There are a number of diagnostic tests you can do with polymorphism. There are polymorphism tests, so you can discern certain factors with some very straightforward blood tests about the nature of certain aspects, and you can identify certain things. It relates to catecholamines, central nervous system function, and the way people respond. It's a good kind of precursor to understand how people respond to the onset of a psychedelic experience as such. But on top of that, you can use this, you can utilize it, optimize, and get people into a very conducive state. And in the past, I've actually worked with people where when you've given connection, you've given the tools, you've given the unconditional positive regard, it's incredible that they've not even gone to treatment. And because they've had that support and that connection, they've not been shamed. They haven't been criticized. They haven't been under the tyranny of being discharged from whatever treatment or whatever it is. And these people have been able to stabilize on whatever medication is that they're trying to deal with and come off by themselves. Never even came to see us. So I don't know how many other people have seen that. It's possible, but what we would do with them is we would see them eventually, but the experience, they would have already undergone that metabolic phase of transiting back down. So they don't have to go through that intense process. So in some regards, I think it's more of a conducive experience if you've already dealt with the physiological adaptations. It's a very metabolically robust experience taking Ibogaine. It's very rough on the body, and I think it's worthwhile exploring that. There's so many avenues. You can work with people with autoimmune conditions. I think there are people that are working with MS and Lyme's, and there are other tools as well. And obviously, we have to optimize and consider the safety aspect. But I think there's a lot of applications, a lot of indication for it can help a lot of people, and you can do so much with low doses. It's incredible. It really is.
Yeah, thank you. That is a huge boon for humanity right now that Ibogaine and yoga is becoming well known and available, and it's going to take 5 to 6 years for it to become in the system. In the meantime, there are so many people positioned to help other people right here.
Yes, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing to feel that you're part of a collective tribe, that people that have a regard for one another, and to be a part in time, in history of now, of the way the world is, to be a part of something that's part of it's the bootloader for change, the change to come. It's a wonderful thing. It's an absolute blessing. But yeah, I mean, the work is always going to continue. I can see that. Whatever happens with executive orders, the treatments will still continue. People will still seek emancipation, and people will get it. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I'm not downplaying the significance of it. I think Rick was kind of it wasn't dismissive, but he's kind of seen it before. It's just not overamping the significance of that. But I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I've had connection with the people that know me and the people that I don't know, that I will get to know, and all the people that will come in. It's like we're rebuilding the constitution of our species one treatment at a time. And I say, if we're going to do it, bring down those numbers. We don't need to be a poppy mill. We just bring down, get it right every time, get people through, and offer them the hand of friendship and tribe, or whatever you want to call it. And then they've got that. And that's something. That's something it's missing out there. People don't have time for it. People are too busy trying to get the tube, get home, feed the kids, pay the bills, or whatever. And it just becomes beside the point. But anyway, I mean, there's other things I could say. It's kind of here or there really now. But yeah.
Well, I think we're at the end of our hour.
Yeah.
We've got 2 minutes left. So, well, we're going to be doing this again and again. We're going to have this Thursday meeting for a while and explore different topics. And hopefully the same people can come back around again, and we can dive deeper into the many subjects that encompass this area. So I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thanks, guys.
If anybody wants to contact you, would you like to leave some information?
Yeah, I'll drop my new work email. This is the thing. I literally feel like I've just come off the assembly line. A lot of what I've been talking about, I'm not just. It's not just a lot of it. I've done a lot of this myself. I've had to deal with a lot of things, and a lot of those that know me, they know that it's been a hell of a journey. It's defied a lot of odds. So, yeah. I can leave. Can I drop an email into the box or somewhere? I can leave details like that.
Well, you can put it in the chat.
Okay. I don't know whether I can do it on the phone. So.
I've also, let's see.
There we go. Being a Luddite here completely. I'll try. That's that. Oh. Okay. At Gmail. There we go. Gmail.com.
You can also find Paul and Anders and a whole bunch of mentors and masters from awake.net who have been on these talks on this directory. Well, thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for your time and your knowledge. And
yeah, thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Lakshmi.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Karen, for.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao. Bye, guys.
Go on. Later.
Hello. Goodbye. Bye.